Welcome to the 6 p.m. meeting of the Northern Region Advisory Council for July 28th, 2021. The meeting is being held in person at the Weber County Commission Chambers in Ogden and being streamed live on YouTube. This is a public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals on the management of wildlife in our state. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife, and we approach this with tremendous emotion and passion. I would encourage all who wish to express their opinion to do so. However, I ask that we respect opposing views on the issues being discussed. I would appreciate the audience keeping their emotions in check, allowing all individuals to freely express their opinions. Appropriate conduct will provide smooth meeting flow, allowing the RAC to listen, digest, and address all concerns, opinions, and proposals offered for consideration. Rude comments, booing, yelling, hooting, or snickering will not be tolerated. If inappropriate behavior persists, the offender may be asked to leave the meeting. I'd like to welcome back in person to the in-person meetings RAC members. I am Mike Lauder, and I am the Vice Chair and Sportsman's Rep on the Northern Region RAC. I will be filling in as chair tonight for Justin Oliver, who is asked to be excused. I have also asked Matt Clark to fill in as Vice Chair tonight, and at this time, I'd ask the council to introduce themselves. We'll start on this end.
I'm representing the livestock.
Push the button, guys.
Push the button.
Do it one more time for us.
Sorry, Junior Goring, and I'm representing the livestock industry.
Darren Perry, I represent the Shoshone Nation.
Matt Clark, Ogden at large.
I'm Ben Nadolski. I'm the regional supervisor, not on the RAC, but here to help support these guys.
Randy Hutchison at large, Ogden.
Ryan Brown at large, Summit County area.
Brad Buchanan representing Sportsman.
David Earl, Ag, Northern Utah.
And we have Emily Jensko online.
Hi, Emily Genso, Salt Lake Field Office, BLM.
Mr. Chair, we're also hoping to be joined online by RAC member Snyder, and who else was going to join us online?
Kevin McLeod.
And Kevin McLeod. Thanks.
I would also like to welcome DWR staff, specifically those that provided presentations and are available to answer questions throughout the meeting. Darren DeBlois, Mammals Coordinator. Would like to welcome the public that are attending in person and that are watching on YouTube. Those that are attending in person will have the opportunity to provide comments regarding any agenda item. If you wish to make a comment, you must fill out a comment card for the item you wish to address and give it to Jody Anderson. The public that are watching on YouTube will not be able to provide comments during the meeting. However, the presentations were provided for viewing online, and the public was able to provide comments to the RAC members prior to this evening. I will start, then we've done the roll call, so I'll turn it over to you to introduce our new RAC member.
Sure. We went through introductions, but a little more detail. We're joined tonight by Brad Buchanan. He's a new RAC member. Representing Sportsman's Interests, replacing former RAC member Aaron Johnson. I want to also take this opportunity to thank RAC member Clark, Chair Oliver, and Randy Hutchison for assisting in interviews thus far. We still have more interviews to go for our non-consumptive seats. We'll be replacing 2 more members in our next meeting, which is in early September. So we'll make 2 more introductions at that meeting. But we had a really rigorous process. Really appreciate the effort these guys put into it. And Brad Buchanan rose to the top. I think we were all really wanting to find someone who was open-minded, collaborative, committed to kindness and candor when we have these kind of discussions. And we felt like we found that in Brad. And so welcome aboard. Good luck. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Hopefully everybody had an opportunity to read the minutes. At this time, I'd ask for a motion to approve both the agenda and the minutes from the May 12th, 2021.
I make a motion that we approve the agenda and the minutes from the May 12th, 2021 meeting.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've accepted the agenda and the minutes. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to Ben for the Wildlife Board meeting update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you'll recall, in our last meeting, we primarily discussed the waterfowl recommendations. The board convened and discussed that item as well as others. The first motion was to approve the division's recommendations as presented with the caveat that we form a working group to get together and bring information back to the board. Again, that's related to the waterfowl recommendation, primarily the recommendation to not allow guides to guide on, or outfitters and guides on WMAs. That motion failed for lack of a second. The next motion was to move that the division establish a special use permit for guided waterfowl hunting on waterfowl management areas for the 2021 season, and that guides who guide on WMAs in Utah would need to apply for this permit. That motion was passed unanimously. The next motion was to form a working group to establish guiding rules and regulations and licensing waterfowl guides in the state of Utah. That also passed unanimous. The next motion was to accept the remainder of the balance of the division's recommendation, which also passed unanimously. Next item was, you might recall, we had a few details related to electronic meeting rule amendments to make tonight possible. Those recommendations passed unanimously as well. They also discussed or reviewed a conservation permit list for 3 years of permits. That tag allocation as presented was also passed unanimously. The next item was to discuss CWMU Advisory Committee vacancies. Those recommendations for filling those vacancies also were passed as presented and passed unanimous. There was some discussion about sage grouse hunts. The Parker Mountain hunt was proposed to be closed due to lower than expected numbers. That discussion went well and also passed unanimously that the Parker sage grouse hunt closure passes presented. There was a little discussion on the election of leadership for the board. So there's a motion made to elect Kevin Albrecht as the Wildlife Board Chair. That motion passed unanimously and followed by a motion to appoint Randy Dirth as the Vice Chair. That also passed unanimous. The board also convened for a hearing to discuss some wildlife code violations, and I think it was a review of former hearing results. The board passed the following motion: that Mr. Stubbs knowingly violated wildlife code sections 2320-4 and 2313-4, and further the motion that this board affirm the hearing officer's order regarding his license to take and pursue bear and cougar. That passed 4-3. And that is everything.
And we're going to come right back to you for the regional update.
That works.
All right.
Sorry, that's a long list of motion summaries. Gets a little bit confusing with all that, but I'll just start by mentioning, of course, everybody's mind is on drought. If it's not on drought, it should be on drought. That's been certainly the focus for us at the division in the northern region. See a lot of folks in the back of the room. They've been just really busy in the field, monitoring conditions, monitoring guzzlers, making sure that wildlife are going to be okay through what we're all experiencing. We have kind of a process internally, both in the habitat and wildlife sections, but also in aquatic sections, that we've got kind of regular intervals and regular check-ins for monitoring drought conditions. In the wildlife side, it seems to be pretty well consensus that a lot of the habitats in the higher elevations are doing okay. We're seeing reasonable green up, mid elevations doing so-so, low elevations obviously getting pretty crispy and burnt. We're finally starting to see some rain, but some of the internal discussions are that some of those lower elevation vegetation that are already struggling probably won't benefit a lot from the rain that we're seeing. We're probably going to see a lot more benefit from these monsoons in the southern portions of the state that where vegetation has sort of evolved in the presence of these kinds of conditions. But where we don't have that, we welcome more rain, but it's probably not going to give us a real big green up, at least certainly not in the lower elevations. So a lot of our effort, things that we can do right now, since we can't predict the weather or control the weather, is we can certainly monitor guzzlers and take steps to make sure guzzlers are full. So some of the most important ones, the Newfies are getting some more water tomorrow, I believe. They're going out to fill up the Big Pass guzzlers tomorrow. Looking at Eric Anderson in the back, Jim Christensen, Dave Smedley, you guys are working on getting some water at Antelope Island. Those guzzlers are starting to run low on water. I don't think they're dry just yet. They're totally dry now. So that's different from a few days ago. So things are moving quickly, but we're coordinating in quick order as well to make sure that water gets where we need it. I think cold water WMA, we've also refilled that WMA or that guzzler. Am I missing any others, you guys? Probably. We've got some out in West Box Elder, looking at Sydney. I think those are doing okay for now. So we'll keep our eye on those.
So does providing water to wildlife count?
If the public's watering wildlife, does that violate the rule about baiting wildlife?
No. So that's the short answer. But it really just applies. The baiting rule and statute applies to hunting over bait. And so plus water, it's not bait technically, but so yeah, we're in good shape. And so for I'll just wrap up on the wildlife section side of things. We're seeing a lot of agricultural degradation, a lot of conflicts with, private producers and needs. We're not fighting over things, but it's certainly putting a lot of pressure on private landowners. And so that's something that we're really mindful of. We're working with a lot of producers to make sure that their needs are being addressed. We don't want to make our way through these conditions on the backs of landowners. So that's been a big emphasis for a lot of our team, is working through those challenges. We'll be finishing up our CWMU renewal applications. It's probably a pretty good time just to remind folks that if you've drawn a tag for a CWMU, it's never a bad time early to contact your CWMU operator if you haven't already done so. On the non-game side of things, and this kind of goes for an invite to RAC members, if anybody's interested in joining our staff in the field, we've got bat mist netting coming up. We've got some folks that are doing pelican trapping. It's quite a big effort. You guys are welcome to attend any of those things. We'll be running rabbit monitoring routes. We've got duck banding coming up. Lots of things that you can do in the field with our biologists if that's something you're interested in doing. We'd love to have you guys out. It's a good opportunity to kind of brag up our employees when you get to spend a little bit of time with them. I think you'll be impressed. There's been a lot of news lately about the Great Salt Lake. Obviously, water levels are low and getting lower. We're setting some new records there, unfortunately, not the kind of records you want to set. But all of the bays are dry. It's going to make for some really challenging conditions for managing water levels in our waterfowl management areas. So, come this fall, I think we're going to have more challenges in terms of hunt success and the amount of effort it's going to take to be successful. It's probably a pretty reasonable forecast for the big game hunts as well. So it's going to be a hard year. There's no question about it. In our law enforcement section, we have one vacancy in our North Summit district. So we'll be looking to fill that. We've been interviewing new applicants for kind of a statewide roster. So we'll either be looking at getting a transfer from within the state or one of the new officers. And
Who's the conservation officer that was there that you're trying to replace?
Jeremy Wilcox, thank you. Jeremy Wilcox. So he has moved on and we'll be introducing a replacement as soon as we can. The law enforcement section's also been really busy with aquatic invasive species interdiction. Just because we don't have a lot of water doesn't mean we don't have a lot of boaters. So those guys have been really busy. The numbers of boats that are being interdicted are through the roof. Challenges to keep boat ramps staffed has been a huge deal. So really commend those guys for the work that they're doing. Just real quick on the fishery side of things, you might recall I've mentioned in the past some of the work we do at Willard Bay to raise walleye and wiper. We just recently stocked 11,000 8-inch wipers. So normally we stock a lot more than that, but we stock them a lot smaller. So this year we stocked them bigger, and we're hoping to get a lot more survival. So our biologists are pretty excited about that. We've also reported on kokanee salmon introductions at Lost Creek, Rockport, East Canyon, and Smith and Morehouse reservoirs. Anglers are starting to see those return to the creel, so that's encouraging. On the non-game side of things, we've got some really go-getter biologists who discovered a new population of something called a western pearl shell. It's a mussel that they found in the Goose Creek drainage, which is way up in the northwest corner of the state. That takes a lot of work to do that, and that marks only the second confirmed population of pearl shell in the state of Utah. So it was actually a really big finding. We've been working through, we talked about the drought monitoring that we do in the wildlife side with the habitat section's help. On the fishery side, we've been looking at it from a perspective of what kind of emergency regulations do we need to be contemplating. We've got sort of 3 or 4 different check-in periods where we continually revisit drought conditions, and where it's warranted, we will take emergency action. So the goal is to make sure that we're not wasting any opportunities for the public. But at the same time, we're also looking really closely at our stocking regimen and making sure we're not putting fish somewhere that we think could end up drying up. And so we're really in the mode of, maximizing efficiencies, but ensuring that we're maximizing opportunities for the public as well. You're going to find that we're just proposing 2 more emergency regulation changes. One's at Pineview, the other's at Newton. We'll double the limits for yellow perch, black crappie, bluegill, and black bullhead at Pineview, and double limits for perch, crappie, and bluegill at Newton. And for both waters, the catch and release regulation will still apply for tiger muskies. So those are 2 things that you can look for, in addition to some statewide changes to community fisheries, where we've added bonus fish statewide at community fisheries, and we also doubled the limit at Blacksmith Fork down below town. So that's some of the things that are going on in the habitat section in the aquatic section. In the habitat section, we're staying super busy with the guzzlers, but also keeping up with maintaining our WMAs, spraying weeds, building fences, fixing fences. We've got fire restrictions in place on our WMAs. Those have gone pretty well. We're constantly replacing signs, repairing fences that people remove in order to burn, etc. So there's no shortage of work being done in the region, and I could probably spend the entire meeting updating you guys on all the work that these guys do. But I won't do that to you, as much as I want to brag about it, how awesome our people are. If there's any questions, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to help answer or defer to someone on the nose.
I just had a kokanee question for you. You mentioned some of the bodies of water that we're putting kokanee in, and the drought conditions, like let's say Lost Creek, for instance.
Mhm.
Worried about those kokanee there?
Not necessarily. Especially right now where we're establishing a population. There's certain population levels that we hope to achieve. We're not really looking to maintain them. We're just trying to get there. So maybe those drought conditions mean less water. Less water means less space for spawning. Less space for spawning probably means fewer fish in the fishery. So it might take us a little bit longer to get to our goals. But as long as there's water, we will see reproduction from kokanee and those tributaries where they run up. It is kind of a thing that we consider, though. Sometimes when you have a lot of fish, especially for kokanee, they'll actually overlap one another. It's called red superimposition. And so it's not always a bad thing when you don't have a lot of reproduction. So since we don't have a long track record at any of those waters, I think we'll just sort of be monitoring it to see what it turns into. But it isn't always a terrible thing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions for Ben regarding the regional update?
Yeah, just a quick question. You may not have it. If you do, great. Last time I asked about the sharp-tailed sage-grouse flex counts, things like that, and everyone said, well, yeah, Parker Mountain went down, and I'm sure that's the case, but I've never seen and I haven't been able to find any of that information. Do you have that?
We do. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were really close to stable this year overall across the region, right? And I think that was the case in the state. Like down by just a few individuals, but pretty dang close to stable. Is that what it was?
Yeah, Jim Christensen, Northern Region Wildlife Manager. So for the Northern Region sage-grouse, we were actually slightly up. Ended up that way statewide. Yeah, we're pretty close to stable.
Do you know what and I know it's not the Northern Region, I'm just curious because I'm going down to help with a count actually this weekend. What was the drop in Parker Mountain? Are you aware?
I can look it up.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
And you
right
can
off
tell
my
me
head.
after.
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you.
Jim, do you know offhand the sharp tail results?
I did not take a look at the final sharp tail, but just in conversations, we were slightly up on sharp tails as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim.
Are there any other questions for Ben on the regional update? All right, at this time, I'll introduce the next agenda item. It's Furbearer and Bobcat harvest recommendations for 2021, 2022. It was presented by Darren DeBlois, Mammals Coordinator, and there will not be a presentation given here this evening. Are there any questions about the agenda item from the RAC for Darren? Let's RAC first.
So I have a couple if no one else does. So are we addressing Bobcats right now or both?
Bobcats right now, so
Bobcats.
Furbearers, yep.
Okay. I was curious and I was surprised we didn't get more comments on this. Really surprised me. But a couple that did come up was also a question I had. Why, and maybe I missed it, but why are you removing the cap or recommending to remove the cap on Bobcats?
It's the guidelines in the plan. And so we're just following what those are. But typically, the biggest driver of Bobcat harvest really is pelt price. And to be honest, I think it's time to take a second look at that plan. I think we've got a lot of data under our belt, and in some ways we kind of chase these metrics that may not be diagnostic of what's actually going on in the population. Juveniles in the harvest is good. It indicates that those animals are reproducing. And but as far as the management decision, it's fairly straightforward. It's it says if this happens, then you do this, and that's why we removed the cap and increased the permit per individual.
And so I apologize, I missed that in your presentation then. So if that's the case, if we're removing the cap now, do you have an expectation on how many more animals will be taken this year?
We did fill we filled the cap. We sold all the permits last year. I could look at the data. Again, we kind of have a data hole in that we don't know what the pelt price was. I think nationwide it was fairly stable. So again, that seems to indicate whether there'll be more bobcats taken or not. And so where that's remained stable, I'd anticipate it'll be similar to last year. But we look at it every year and make adjustments as necessary. So.
Okay. And it's probably obvious, I think, why I'm asking that, but is there a concern there's going to be too many taken?
No, we've got a pretty healthy bobcat population overall. Prey is a concern because of the drought conditions. So we want to keep a close eye on our rabbit populations, but those have started to tick up. And so they tend to cycle, and bobcats tend to follow that. So things are looking good. But again, we'll look at things next spring and see where we are.
And you said you're considering maybe looking at the management plan. When is it up for review again?
I think 2020. Actually, I don't think it has a sunset. I think it just leaves it up to the division to review as necessary for Bobcat. And so we could take a look at that anytime. The problem is substituting metrics. We have these three that don't seem to track really well with what the population does over time. And so we'd need to put a committee together and figure out if there's some other things we got to look at, and maybe there's some research warranted too, as far as that goes. We have some Bobcat research from, I believe, in the 80s done in Utah, and that's what a lot of our metrics are based on now. But we got a lot of new technology, and we might be able to tease out some other metrics, and it may be something like pelt price from the prior year or something like that may be predictive. So that's, in my mind, those are some of the things I think we'd look at, but we definitely would want to put a committee together and work through it.
So do you think that's something you guys will do this year?
We certainly could. I haven't had the discussion with the chief or the director's office, but so I wouldn't want to, tie us to a date right at the moment, but it's certainly something that we've talked about. Is probably something that's due. I don't remember the last time it was revised, but it's been a while since we looked at that plan. So.
Hi, Darren. It's Em on the phone. I'm going to ask you my annual question about, do you have any measure of population abundance for kit fox, which is still a BLM sensitive species?
Good question. I know that Kim Hersey has been working. Look, you're like up above.
You don't
I'm just
have
trying
to
to decide where I have to look. Sorry about that. I know Kim's been working on some of that, and so maybe we ought to touch base with her and see where they are. I know they've been looking at specifically at kit fox. Harvest tends to be low. I don't think, and I think most of it is incidental. They're usually trapping coyotes, and they wind up catching kit fox, but it's relatively low. I can certainly follow up with you on what's going on.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep, sure.
Are there any more questions from the RAC for Darren? This time I'll open it up to public questions. And remember, this is the question portion, not the comments. So if you have any questions for Darren, you're welcome to address them at this time. Okay, we don't have any questions from the public. You want to take a minute, Ben, and summarize the public comment?
Can do. Won't take too long. Like Randy mentioned, we didn't have too many respondents. We had 5 total responses to the surveys for both of tonight's items, 4 comments for fur-bearers. 20% were, so 1 of the 4 was strongly agreed with the recommendation, and 80% or 3 strongly disagreed. Of those that did provide more written responses, we had just some comments that there weren't enough bobcats to justify the increases, nor was there the ecological justification for the recommendations that are being made, and some comments about the ethics of trapping being cruel and indiscriminate.
If I could offer a thought on that, if I'm allowed to, Chairman, just the idea of trapping being cruel and indiscriminate, on some of the social media groups with the Utah Fur Trappers Association last year, when we reduced the number of tags, there was talk of guys trying to live trap, like kind of in a cage trap, and trying to be very discriminate, very deliberate in which animals they were taking, and looking at age, size, but particularly the markings on the belly. The more spots, the better, the more desirable the fur it's going to bring. So just the idea that trapping's indiscriminate, I think it depends upon what kind of trap's being used. And last year, when we reduced the tags, guys in the field were looking to find ways, innovative ways, to be much more selective about what animals they were taking.
It's interesting. Okay, at this time I'll call for public comment, and then we'll go to the comment cards. Do we have any on the?
So I've got 1 card for the fur-bearer specifically. Does that sound right? Cody Bassett.
Hello, my name's Cody Bassett. I'm the Vice President of the Utah Trappers Association. Some of the things we wanted to propose, we also support the recommendations given by Darren on the current Bobcat proposals. A couple other proposals we wanted to bring forth was one, as it states right now, if you're from out of state, you could come into Utah and trap. Like you can come in, the only time they have to buy a license is if they're going after protected animals, as in bobcats, badgers, kit fox, gray fox, beaver, mink. Anyways, what we're wanting to propose is for, if you're a non-resident trapper, that you have to buy a Furbearer license for protected and non-protected species. The whole reason of that is to protect our wildlife. An example is if a trapper comes from out of state to come trap coyotes where he doesn't need a license, there's a very high possibility he's going to catch a kit fox, which is protected. And if he doesn't have a license, he would have to let that animal go. And by doing so, there's a very high chance that he could either harm or maim the kit fox, whereas he would be able to just keep it if it had any damage to it. He'd be able to keep it. And so that's what we're proposing. First is to pretty much any non-resident trapper out of the state has to buy a Furbearer license, and that'll protect both protected and non-protected animals. The second one we wanted to propose is right now there's a lot of areas that are closed to beaver trapping. There's a list in the proclamation of areas. Some of them I kind of wanted to highlight, for instance, was Blacksmith and Logan Canyons, and also over in Woodruff. Some of those areas have been closed for multiple years. I know Woodruff, those drainages have been closed for, I know, at least over 15 years. And we're wanting to propose not a full out opening of them because we don't want to see the damage to the population numbers. You know, they've created the habitat. When they've done in the past, they've come through, trappers have come and just trapped them and wiped out the population numbers. What we're wanting to propose is opening up to a draw unit where people can put in, apply for those areas, and the biologist can go through and put a quota on. And we can have the opportunity to go in and harvest the beavers, keep the population in check, and also avoid damages. For instance, up left hand, I know they flood the road every year. And if I'm correct, the state usually sends in a government trapper to trap them. Where if we open that up to the public, they can put in, they can have the opportunity to go and trap them, then we can kind of keep the population in check and to avoid any damages. So those are my proposals.
Thank you, Cody.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Do we have any more?
That was the only card I had for this section. Are there any other public comments?
I believe so, right? Hang on a second. Cody, can you come back to the mic for us, please? They'd like to ask you a couple questions about your proposal.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan.
So just looking at the Utah Fur Trappers Association report for their last sale, it was in 2020, right? Because we weren't allowed to hold our sale in 2021. So the data is a little old there.
Yeah.
But I think the average price of a beaver skin, just fur put up, was $9.15 a skin. And by the time a guy goes out, finds beaver, goes out, makes his sets, goes and checks his sets, brings his catch home, puts his fur up, are guys going to put in for a draw to go do that for $9.15 an animal? Is there enough incentive? Would guys take advantage of that, do you think?
Yeah, because the castor prices are very high right now. And a lot of guys will go for the pelt, the carcass, and, well, actually beaver. A lot of guys use everything on a beaver. But a lot of guys will go up for the castor and for the hide. So, and it all depends on which sale you look at. Like at the Utah sale, we're historically low. Not a lot of buyers come to buy beaver unless they're in demand. Whereas if you go up to Idaho, they're averaging $19. So it just depends on where you take them. or where they're taking them, and also the price. So, yep.
Thank you, Cody.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, at this time, discussion, including any clarification or additional information for the RAC members, maybe requested from the DWR staff. Do you guys have anything else or any other questions?
Quick question for Darren. And this, I didn't know to do any research because I didn't know it was going to come up. So this is to educate me. So if out of state, people come in from out of state to trap here, they don't need licenses other than for protected animals. Is that correct?
Right now, right. They need a Furbearer license if they're planning on taking protected species. So for coyotes and raccoons, they wouldn't need a Furbearer license. They do all need trap registration licenses. So, and those are a $10 fee. So that we can monitor the traps that are set out in the field. So that's kind of the state of things now. I was just trying to look really quick and see if we had a non-resident fee schedule for, and we do for Furbearer license. So that'd be a real change, but certainly within the purview of the RACs and the board to discuss.
And this is out of your area, but you may know. Do you know what other states around us do in regards to this?
Cody, I think, might be more up on it, but my recollection is that most other states that surround us require a non-resident Furbearer license, but they do think coyotes are a little different classification in many of our neighboring states. They're considered small game or they're protected in some way. Utah's a little bit unique in how we classify coyotes and raccoons. So that where Cody go? Is that right, Cody? Pretty much. Yeah. Okay.
Darren, I was going to mention we probably would need to look at where our authority ends to. I know that the
So
Department of Ag has authority. in
there's
statute.
that. You know, coyotes and coyotes specifically don't fall under the authority of the Division of Wildlife Resources. We don't manage, and we don't have management authority. So that could be a difficulty in terms of requiring a permit if your stated purpose is to only take coyotes. We need to look at that legally, but I think the RAC is certainly within their purview to have a discussion and make recommendations to the board, and I'd have to do some homework on that. But yeah, it'd be tough. You know, I don't know if many of you remember, but we the last couple of years we made a lot of changes to the Furbearer rule, and this was a kind of a point of trying to walk a fine line between allowing people to take non-protected species, but also protecting incidental take of protected animals. And so we tried to thread that needle, and that's kind of where things are right now. I'll just leave it at that. I think that's probably.
Any other questions from the RAC for Darren?
Would you be willing to comment on the beaver issue?
Yeah, it's certainly doable. What we do is I ask the regions to review their closures every year, and so some of those will come in and out. That it is a good point that once a drainage opens, there is a likelihood to overtrap. Sometimes those drainages don't. You know, the beavers have moved on, so it depends on case by case. I'm not opposed. I don't think we want to do a full-blown draw like we do with other species, but maybe something we could do at a regional level. Maybe compile a list, and if we need trapping done in a closed area, we could have kind of a local draw. Certainly, something we could work with the Furbearer group on. So Utah Trappers Association on.
So there's no other areas that do anything like that in the state?
Yeah, there will be other closed areas throughout the state, so listed in the guidebook. And different regions have different reasons why they close. Some of them may be closed as sort of a brood rearing area where they're trying to keep an area closed and allow beavers to populate, other drainages. So it kind of depends on what the objectives are. And I'd like to keep it on a case by case basis, but certainly we could work with trappers when some need to be taken or when some limited opportunity might be available. But maybe do that at a local scale rather than doing a statewide kind of thing.
Thank you, Darren. Any other discussion on the motion? Or I'm sorry, not on the motion, but on the agenda item? At this time, I'll entertain a motion. We can entertain a motion to consider Cody's comments. And I'm probably not supposed to coach him up, right?
Yeah.
I was just giving him some options because it was quiet.
When someone needs coaching, you coach it.
All right.
No, and where I'm hesitating is I'm not a huge fan of having no limit. That's what I'm hesitating on. But that doesn't, I don't know about for everybody else. So I'm okay with the explanations and everything. I get it. I agree with the proposals, but it makes me uneasy to have an open-ended number of permits. And we did a quick, and it's not scientific by any means, but did a quick Google search, identified someone was helping. And the price of pelts is actually going up. So that makes me nervous. And so I don't know how I'd address that in a motion right now. I've been mulling it over.
Okay.
It also seems like public sentiment, what public sentiment there was against removing the cap. And from Darren's presentation today, it sounds like we don't really have good data to know that we're doing the right thing. Now, I would be more comfortable keeping the cap and reviewing the management plan, see if we can get better direction, because it doesn't sound like our management plan is really helping us out much right now.
So in my mind, I'm kind of going along those lines thinking it would be, if we took too many animals out of the game, it'd be hard to get them back. But if they're there to take, they'll be perhaps there, another year if we kind of kick the can down the road and get better information. So I'm in line with you two guys.
How about if I suggest this? Accept the proposal as presented, except leaving the cap and the current cap in place.
I second that.
Okay, so I got a motion from Randy and a second from Emily to accept the plan as presented, but leaving the cap in place. Correct? Say that again. Okay. Oh, for Bobcats, yes. At this time, we'll have a vote. But show your hands. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Carries 4-2. In favor. Emily?
Emily was in favor.
Emily was in favor. So 5-2
We've got
in favor.
Casey's online too.
Which way did Casey vote? I can't see.
You unmuted yourself.
Casey, are you in favor of the motion?
I vote no.
So it still carries 5-3 with Emily for and Casey against, made it 5-3 in favor of the motion.
so besides
You're at 6-3, not counting me, right?
Mike doesn't vote.
Yeah.
there's nine total.
All I had 4.
Just by raise of hands, who was the no again?
Should be Casey, Emily, Junior, and David. Not Emily. Emily was yes. Casey, David, and Junior.
So 6-3.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Carries.
And I would also like to make a motion that we direct the Wildlife Board to look into both the non-resident Furbearer license idea as well as having a pool for as needed beaver trapping. I mean, it sounds like there's some gray area what we can really do there, but I'd like to have that looked into.
I'll second that.
I was going to say that's a recommendation. That wouldn't be a motion, right, Ben? Is that what I'm understanding?
You can make a motion to recommend.
Okay,
that
make a
that
motion
the
to
board or the
recommend.
division, but
And so I got it from Matt to, are you writing all this down?
yeah.
Okay, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
Got a motion from Matt. Who's the second? From Ryan. To one more time, Matt. I got sidetracked when I was
Right, so
writing.
I'd make a motion that we recommend that the Wildlife Board look into the Furbearer's proposal for a non-resident Furbearer license requirement, as well as having a trapper pool for like as needed beaver trapping, like a contact list kind of thing.
Thanks, Matt. So all in favor, show right hand, say aye. Okay. Okay, one more time, raise your hand so I get the right count. 1, 2, 3, 7. Emily and Casey. Okay, I got Emily.
Yeah.
So that's 9. It's unanimous. That's a unanimous request. Perfect. Okay. This time we'll move on to the next agenda item for this evening. It'd be the Cougar recommendations. Rule R6 57-10 revisions for 21-22. Darren Du Bois, Mammals Coordinator. Do we have any questions from the RAC for Darren in regards to the Cougar recommendations?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Darren, I see we have a recommendation to reduce the number of cats by 1 in Box Elder County. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I assume that justification is from the plan. Is that
Right. Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. With the exception of East Canyon, all the recommendations are just in line with what the plan requires.
And we've proven in the past that the plan hasn't always come out the way we thought it would be for other counties.
Right. Yeah. Well, the plan works pretty well, but up until now, we've been pretty much increasing under the plan. So this is the first time we've seen some reduction. Well, that's not totally true. But we've seen more reductions this year than we have in the past.
Yeah. I would submit to you that the people I represent, we have about 48,000 lambs born in Box Elder County in our lambing grounds.
Yeah.
Primarily, it's private ground. I recognize the difference there between the hunting pressure, the trapping pressure, whatever, as opposed to the national forest and what have you in Cache and Rich County. But of those 48,000 lambs, the last 3 years since we've been trying to keep somewhat an accurate record, we've failed to market less than 35,000 lambs on an average. I know more than anybody on this table. The Cougars didn't kill 13,000 lambs. Of course they didn't, but they darn sure took their share. We don't have a field because it is on private ground, and it's really hard for us to calculate that or figure that out. But they're taking their share. I'm not privy to the cow-calf operations, but I can tell you this: whatever eats a lamb and a calf is eating a fawn. And our deer populations are suffering in Box Elder County just like they are everywhere else. So my recommendation would be to not. No, in fact, my recommendation would be to eliminate the cap on the Cougars, just like you have in these other counties. And primarily because we're sitting right next to Idaho, which has a very poor control over their animals. And I don't suppose Nevada has much better control over theirs to the west. Thank you.
Oh, you might as well stay up
Yeah, I
there.
was going to say, I might as well save my calories like I need to.
I didn't write these down and I should have, and I'm sure you have them there in your notes. But you presented some slides showing the various harvests of cougars from last year. So last year, if memory serves correctly, is the first year that the predator management law kicked in. Am I correct in my memory?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So what was the difference in harvest from the year prior to last? to
Overall
next year?
statewide, I could actually pull this up. Let me just get the slide and I will present my screen and we can we can look at several years worth of, oh, I gotta wait, I gotta share first and then.
You're way techier than I am.
All right, well, we'll see. It hasn't happened yet. Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. How does that looks okay on there? Can you all see that?
Good enough.
Okay. So this is the trend, harvest trend since 1990. So it's just a little over 20 years worth of data, 21 years worth of data. The white line on this graph is sport harvest, and the upper yellow line includes all forms of mortality that we detect. So roadkill, wildlife services take, landowner depredation take, that kind of thing. So probably speaks for itself, but certainly I'd be happy to answer questions about it.
Yeah, and so that was the lead question, not leading you somewhere.
Yeah.
But so with that, I mean, it's a pretty good uptake.
Yeah.
And then in your presentation, you also stated that, doing this type of management, that the objective is to leave it into place for several years without specifying. Well, if we have, the white line goes quite steep from last year to this year. If the plan's to leave it in place for several years, doesn't that have a high probability of having severe impact on their?
On units that are under predator management plans, it is our intent to reduce cougar densities on those units. And so we would expect to see increased harvest. Maybe, I think it's on here. This graph shows the percent females in the harvest. And typically, if you're below 40%, you've got the closer you get to 40%, but are still under, you're talking about a stable population. Once you go over that, you're talking about a reduction. You can see that we actually went above 40 last year, so we'd expect to see a reduction statewide. If you look at a unit by unit snapshot based on last year's, there are some particular units where we saw a significant increase in harvest. The manti is one, some units in the southern part of the state. The rest, even though they went unlimited, stayed relatively the same as what the previous quotas were. So statewide, it looks like we're seeing a reduction. But again, that's by design with drought and mule deer populations declining. Our objective is to lower those predator numbers and then try to bring those populations back into line as hopefully mule deer numbers begin to grow as we get out of this drought cycle. So that's by design.
Okay. And I know we don't have any say or any input in the predator management law or statute that went through the last year. So, I'm not going to beat on that too much. I'm just curious. So then the follow up on that, though, I know the division's been doing study on fawn survival.
Right.
Did a lot of collaring. I had not, other than I've seen one organization purport this was the finding. I've never seen any findings on that.
Okay.
Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, things are, I think they just released some data last night. Things are looking pretty grim across the state. They tend to be better in the northern part. From what Ben mentioned, that we seem to have remained pretty good in our high elevation where a lot of fawns are born.
Let me clarify a little bit in relation to predators, in relation to the cougar. So I know with drought and everything, it's horrific.
So we look at a couple of things when we determine whether or not to implement a predator management plan on a unit. One is cause specific mortality, and it could be to fawns, but even more critical is adult survival. So for example, in the manti, we have about 73% adult deer survival, and most of that was attributable cause specific. So they're going out looking at a carcass and determining what killed it, and it's cougars on the manti. It's one of a few data points that indicates that there is such a thing as top-down effects. In other words, a predator expressing downward pressure on population. This year, after we've had some high quotas on the manti, and then it went into a predator management plan last year, it's 97%. survival during a drought on adult does. So that's significant. We do have cause-specific data on about 25 of the 33 units that are under predator management. So that's the direct cause where cougars kill adult animals or young animals. The other concern is sort of what I alluded to before, and that is when you see a large reduction from a time-specific cause like a drought or heavy winter, and those populations of mule deer fall far below or significantly below the ability of the normal habitat to support them, that predators can then again have an effect. And so the literature shows that there's always a lag. So you'll see the prey population decline. Eventually the predator population will decline similarly. But there's a time period where you're carrying the same load of predators on a reduced prey population. Our objective is to lower those predator numbers quicker than which they would normally come down, and then to let those populations come back into sync. So those are kind of the two things we're talking about with mule deer. And then bighorn sheep they're small populations, and cougars can exert quite a bit of pressure if they get into a herd. So that's it in a nutshell. I hope that wasn't too long of an answer, but that's kind of what we're looking at in those instances.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the RAC? For Darren.
We seen a proposal from the Houndsman Association in regards to a study. I know it was brought up at the Central RAC. Either the study has just begun or about to begin. Right. Can you share what you know about, I guess, the background of that?
Sure, yeah. And they'll have an opportunity, obviously, during comments to raise their points specifically. So I'll hold off on commenting on specifics, but I will talk a little bit about the study. So we have undertaken with one of our district biologists working on his master's degree, a study looking at cougars and scavenging rates, primarily in the central part of the state. So we're looking at the Nebo and some of the Wasatch. USU's in the third year of a study in 3 units, the Cache, the Manti, and the Book Cliffs, looking at what cougars are taking and what their kill rates are, among other things. Bear, kleptoparrot, where bears take kills, that kind of thing. And we're trying to marry, what is the scavenging rate between what BYU's seeing when they go out and look at a deer that's died, and what the USU study is seeing when they go out and look at where a cougar's killed an animal. So this way we're looking directly. So the aim of the study is to take fresh carcasses out, put them on the landscape. We've got collared animals, and then look at how often those carcasses might be scavenged. We know that they weren't killed by a cougar. They were killed by a car in most cases. So that's the gist of it. There may be some other products that could come out of it, but that's the main thrust of that study.
Any other questions for Darren from the RAC? This time I'll ask for questions from the public. Remember to step up to the microphone and state your name.
Good evening, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in the meeting. I looked at the information that the division puts on the internet, on its website, and I'm aware that they are recommending 5,000 something fewer permits for mule deer, but 2,500 roughly more permits for elk. And the justification, I'm assuming, although I think it's actually mentioned, is that the drought, is affecting the herds. And that's the explanation or the justification for taking so many cougars. But if that's the case, I'm just wondering what the explanation is for increasing the number of elk permits. by more than 2,500. Elk are bigger animals than deer also. And I know they don't eat all exactly the same things, but it just seems odd that you would reduce the number of permits for mule deer more than 5,000 and then increase for elk if the drought is really the problem here. I'd just like to hear more about that. Thank you.
I'm not the big game coordinator, but I will take a stab at answering this. And certainly those folks from the region, if I'm like getting way off line, please let me know. I think a lot of the increase in the elk permits has to do with competition on the landscape during drought with livestock. And so we've working with our partners in the agricultural industry to try to reduce the number of mouths out there on a limited resource. And so that's my best stab at it. If anybody wants to add to that, I'd be happy to entertain that.
Thank you, Darren. Are there any more questions from the public? Okay. This time we'll turn it over to Ben for public comment.
Thank you. So we, again, 5 total people participated in the online survey before the meeting. 4 commented specifically to the recommendations for Cougars. We had an even split of those 4. 1 strongly agreed, 1 neither agreed nor disagreed, 1 somewhat disagreed, 1 strongly disagreed. So good luck with that. But there were a couple long written comments. One was in opposition to the recommendation, mentioned frustrations that mule deer herds are struggling, and it doesn't make sense to increase or to decrease quotas in the face of struggling deer herds. That kind of goes to RAC member Junior Goring's comments, where you're seeing pressures to your pocketbook. We're certainly seeing pressures to our herds at the same time, and we agree. Just a little more explanation on why those recommendations were made the way they were. The plan is somewhat prescriptive. We do try to stick with the plan in our recommendations. The plan's very specific. If percent female harvest is over 40%, the division would recommend an increase or a decrease to harvest. And so we felt important just to honor the terms of the plan. And so we thought, but we also recognized the need to keep top-down pressure on our herds down. And so the decrease of 1 was that attempt. But we tend to agree with your sentiment, Junior, and respect whatever recommendation you make tonight. But hopefully, the gentleman that made the comment online heard that comment too. I think that applied to a few of our units in the northern region. So thanks. There was also another comment in the written record that was specific to carrying capacity, a little discussion about not Whirling disease, sorry, I'm a fish guy at heart. Chronic wasting disease, thank you. That lions could be an effective tool for keeping CWD threats down. Also some discussion about carrying capacity, and that simply reducing top-down pressures wouldn't really result in an increase to ungulate herds. But specifically what they mention is that it doesn't make sense to increase quotas when simply by seeing a decrease in ungulate populations. Just to clarify from the division's perspective, we don't just look at decreases in big game herds and then automatically recommend an increase in lion harvest. It would be specific. We would need to show a causal connection to the decrease in the herds. So it isn't simply an if then, it's a if then we evaluate, and if we see a connection, then we can make that recommendation. So that would summarize the comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. This time we can call for public comment, and we'll go to the cards.
All right, I have 5 cards, I think. So let's start with Corey from the Houndsman Association.
Corey Huntsman from the Utah Houndsman Association. Thank you guys for your service on the RAC, and I appreciate this opportunity to have my voice heard. I sent everybody an email this morning. I am a known procrastinator, but I don't typically procrastinate that late. I do apologize. For those of you that haven't had an opportunity to read through my letter, it was just in regard to this Cougar study. Brian Hoover will go over the remainder of the UHA's proposals. So recently, we've partnered with the Division of Wildlife and BYU on a new Cougar study. The parameters of this study are 6 units within the central unit. It's Wasatch Strawberry, Wasatch Temp, Cascade, Ochre Stansbury East, Nebo, and Nebo Face. Due to the unpredictability of individual cougars and the unknown dispersal trends, it'd be extremely beneficial to keep these animals online for multiple years. At least from a data standpoint, it would. With the increased hunting pressure on mountain lions, it'll be highly unlikely to obtain these objectives unless we're proactive in implementing protection for these collared lions for a temporary basis. I'd like to propose that we make it prohibited to kill collared lions with the aid of hounds on the 6 units within the study boundaries for a 3-year duration. This would not include depredation or spot and stalk hunts. We don't want to have a sportsman get in trouble for an accident if he couldn't see a collar, and we certainly want livestock guys to be able to protect their livelihood. The Cougar management plan has been set. It was set in 2015, right? And it expires 2025. That's 3 hunting seasons from now. So I would suggest that to assist in a revamped Cougar management plan, that we do implement a 3-year protection on these cats. And then at the end of the 3 years, we can evaluate the cause and effects and determine if we want to abort this plan from there. Couple key notes. None of these proposed 6 units in this study are in a predator management plan for deer. In fact, they're all doing reasonably well compared to the rest of the state. We didn't have the big winter die-offs like the Cache did and Chalk Creek. There are 3 units that are in predator management for bighorn sheep. However, having GPS capabilities on the lions will be a huge benefit for sheep depredation issues. A couple key notes to point out. Well, one concern that we've been addressed with a couple times is, will this take away opportunity from sportsmen if passed? And we've been mindful of that from the beginning. So far we've collared 6 lions, and we haven't been cutting roads like you typically would hunting lions. We've been hiking and free casting dogs in about as rough as terrain as we can navigate in to try and avoid that. Another thing to consider, I said it's within 6 units. It's technically 7 because we're going to try and collar some of the Salt Lake, Wasatch Front Range, which doesn't allow a hound season. So we didn't see that necessary to include in the proposal. But out of the 6 lions that we have collared, 5 of those are female, so only 1 tom. So we're shooting for around 30 collars. If that ratio, that 5-to-1 ratio continues, we'll have 5 out of the 30 lions being toms spread out on 7 units. I don't see that's going to impact taking away any opportunity for sportsmen, but from a data standpoint, it would be a significant gain. One last point, this is all in the central region. We did run this through the central RAC last night, and it passed in favor with an 11-to-1 vote. You guys have any questions for me?
Any questions for Corey? Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sorry, Junior.
You said it's passed 11-to-1 in the central region.
Yes, sir.
And if I understand you right, what you're proposing does not affect our region.
Not at all, sir.
What we're doing wrong.
Push the button.
Just push it, but don't hold it.
Okay, it is not affecting our region.
No, this is strictly central unit.
Okay.
And for clarification, we have a reasonably working relationship with the wool growers in our area, and we're happy to assist them if these collared lions are causing any problems.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions for Corey? Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Okay, next up would be Brian.
Just a quick reminder while you're on your way up, just 3-minute time limit on public comments. I see Matt Clark's keeping time over here.
For clarification, Ben, is it 3 minutes if you're representing yourself and 5 minutes if you're representing an organization? Okay. So I'm Brian Hoover. I'm here representing the Utah Hounds Association. First, I want to say thank you to everybody in this room, because there's only one reason that we're all here, and that's because we care about our wildlife in this state. So huge thank you to everybody here. And I really appreciate the opportunity to address the committee. Starting out, I want to just second the motion behind what Corey's saying. And to your point, Junior, no, it does not affect the state up here, but it is a huge benefit to the overall data collection and management opportunities that we may be able to see within the Cougar study or within the Cougar populations. I'd also like to call out that in the current Cougar management plan, it asks for additional study objectives. In my letter, I've outlined some of those opportunities in which this study may be able to fulfill some of those asks from the 2015 to 2025 Cougar management plan. Items such as enhanced population techniques, understanding habitat use and prey dependencies, how cougars disperse throughout Utah, which could lead to opportunity within the wool growers, understanding and validating lion scavenging, which is currently the primary purpose of the unit, or of the study. But to Darren's point, there's going to be some byproducts of the study that will be able to push data out to the whole for us to be able to manage within. Secondly, I'd like to move into some objectives or some asks from the UHA. As of last night, we found out, or were informed, that a few of these are not items in which the committee can really push to the Wildlife Board. So I just want to bring them up as informational items for us, so we don't have to sit here and discuss it for a long period of time like we did last night. First off, the UHA was asking for the removal of a public lands verbiage from Rule 657.1021. That's our depredation rule. In that rule, it gives 96 hours for the take of a depredating lion. UHA had no issue with that rule, part of the rule. However, within the section 4 of that rule, it gives the division the ability to issue tags for chronic depredating areas, irregardless of the season, and unlimited tags. Our ask was to be only on public lands, to remove the verbiage of public land grazing allotments out of that rule, so that on our public lands with our public wildlife, we were not issuing tags for lions that could have just been transient lions moving into the space way after the fact that we had livestock in the area. It was disclosed last night that this would be a legislation change and not something that the board could change, but I still wanted to raise it as a concern of the Hounds Club and also an item for consideration in the future. The next item that the Hounds Club was throwing out was the Beaver East moving to predator management designation. Right now, the mule deer data on the Beaver East does not necessarily support the fact that we have a depredation issue on the Beaver East. It shows that the deer are moving into winter in poor body conditions and coming out of the winter with poor body conditions or not alive. In that case, it actually is showing that we have a summer habitat potential item in order to address in that space. And we were suggesting that House Bill 125 does not apply unless it was determined predators are a significant limiting factor on big game populations. In last night's meeting, it was shown that this is a director item, and we do not have the authority to push it one way or the other. However, again, we wanted to make sure that the information was known. Item 4 is an ask for, to recommend an action item be given to the division. It is not clearly stated to our knowledge right now of when a management unit is, or a unit is moved into a management plan or out of a management plan. We were asking for the division to be given an action item to establish, document, and publish clear criteria of what would move a unit into a management plan due to deer, or into out of a management plan, or into a management plan due to sheep, or out of a management plan due to sheep. Then our last item that we were bringing forward was in an attempt to help the division move the lion harvest to focused areas, and the focused areas in which they have moved the unit into PMPs, where they are now saying by moving it into a PMP, they need those focused harvests. In doing so, we were recommending moving the units that are currently in harvest objective into split units. Split meaning limited entry with a harvest objective on the back end of the season. What that would do is the individuals who are currently, or the hunters that are currently hunting in those harvest objective units, would then be forced into the unlimited current units for over the calendar harvest opportunities. It would also give the public more units in which to utilize their bonus point systems, where they've been harboring those precious points for so many years, and give them the social aspect of actually feeling like they have a limited entry hunt and a trophy hunt opportunity in the state. Thirdly, this proposal asks or gives the opportunity to reduce the complexity of the guidebook by simply making unlimited units, which are just unlimited, go hunt over the counter, and split with a limited entry harvest objective. It eliminates the middle hunt of our harvest objective. So you're going from 3 different types of hunts to 2 different types of hunts within the state, making it basically just a limited entry and your unlimited units. Those are our proposals. And are there any questions from me from the board?
Nope. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, so next I have Kurt Robinson.
I represent Western Wildlife Conservancy, which is an organization I founded here in 1997 in Salt Lake. My organization is opposed to the plan regarding cougars, increasing the number of predator management units and abandoning limits on take and so forth. Ever since I've been involved in coming to these meetings, which by the way, has been 32 years now, since 1989, there's been talk constantly about reducing the number of predator management units. If you look at the Cougar plan, for instance, it even states that as one of the objectives or goals. It never happens. And, you have to ask yourself, what's wrong here then? Is it that the objectives are too high and not really warranted by the facts? Or is it just that a quirk of nature, of weather or something, one year reduces the number of deer, for instance, and keeps it below objective? It's probably not that, because the predator management idea kicks in after so many years. I think it's about 3. We have below objective counts in the deer herd. And so that suggests there's something else going on. And in this case, I submit it's the drought. Everybody by now should know that we're in a drought. And I see 2 options. One is to revise the predator management plans the cougar management plan. And you either have either attack, I mean, right the way it is now, ask yourself, what happens if we keep going this way? If there is a prolonged drought, are we going to keep hitting the cougars over and over again? And if that doesn't work, what next? And I wonder if there's been any planning or thinking along these lines, because I think that's exactly what's going to happen. On the other hand, if drought isn't a factor, then this will all be corrected naturally if we allow it to happen. We don't have to micromanage every year and try to predict the future. You know, what I'm suggesting, bottom line, I think, is that there's something wrong here. This is a desperate act on the part of the director. And there's got to be some thinking here by all of us, that includes me and you, about how we go forward in the future, because we can't just keep attacking lions. That's not going to work in the long run for all kinds of reasons, which I won't go into. But you know, we've got to find out what the root of the problem is and address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk.
Okay, next I have Denise Peterson.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me tonight. Really appreciate you guys being here. And I want to echo what you said, Brian, everybody being here tonight. It's great to see so many people come out to really just talk about what's going on with our wildlife here in Utah. So my name is Denise Peterson, obviously a resident of Utah, but I moved here from Michigan because cougars are awesome. Let's just be honest about that. So I'm representing the Mountain Lion Foundation. And in my capacity there, I'm a conservation advocate, GIS, and media specialist. So in my role, I also spend a lot of time up in the mountains here, hot on the heels of our cats, because they're fascinating creatures. And, you know, it's really something to be in their environment. But I also come from a hunting background. So I grew up hunting out east with my family, and we saw what the impacts were of not having a top predator, and we'd see herds completely wiped out by EHD and CWD. So they play a really vital role. That said, I'd really like to offer a couple of recommendations based primarily on my correspondence with the Utah Houndsman Association. And these would include not adding the Beaver East unit to predator management status. We'd like it to take it a step further, though, and recommend not adding any more units to predator management status until the division establishes more clear criteria for when a unit enters and ultimately exits predator management status. And then on top of that, I think that the public should also be given the opportunity to provide feedback on these criteria as well. Additionally, that hunters, going off of what Corey and Brian talked about, was that hunters are not permitted to kill any of the collared cats in the study so that researchers can more accurately understand what's going on with cats in the study area without interference. So that said, within these recommendations by the UHA, we believe that they are in line with current research on cougar management, and we'd really like to support them on that. Mounting evidence suggests that a management approach of intense cougar population control to increase deer populations is less effective than one might think. Research published by Dr. Hilary Cooley and others in 2009 found that heavy cougar harvest corresponds with increased immigration that more than compensates for cougar removal. More recently, a study published in 2020 by doctors John Landre and Chris Papuchis found that deer populations in a state where cougars are not hunted show no significant differences in density and abundance compared to deer populations in states that allow cougar hunting. Instead of targeting cougars and other predators to boost big game species, we instead need to address climate issues such as droughts and wildfires, as well as habitat loss and fragmentation due to urban expansion. We asked that DWR reevaluate mule deer and bighorn sheep population objectives and then set more realistic targets for the species that incorporate current habitat availability and climate factors. We further asked that DWR factor in the impacts of domestic livestock and disease transmission to wild populations instead of defaulting to killing more cougars. Lastly, we asked that the DWR consider the myriad ecosystem services that cougars provide when establishing their hunt recommendations. These cats keep big game populations healthy while also promoting biodiversity. Cougars also predate on deer affected with chronic wasting disease, which ultimately improves the health of deer herds, which benefits hunters. Moreover, one recent study found that cougars actually help keep roadways safer by changing deer behavior and reducing deer vehicle collisions. These cats have much to offer for both Utah's hunting and non-hunting communities, and the hunting recommendations should reflect this reality. With that, I want to thank you for your time and ask you if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Denise.
Just a quick question. Where did you get that? You quoted the research. Where did you get it from?
I would be more than happy to send it to you. I have loads of research.
I'm on the DWR website.
Okay.
Send it. I'd be interested in seeing it.
Randy Hutchison? Okay, I can send you that and more.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Denise.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I have one more card. This is Sunday's Hunt.
Good evening. I appreciate being able to be a part of the process. My name's Sunday's Hunt. I'm the Utah State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. On behalf of my organization and our supporters in Utah, I ask this RAC to oppose the recommended changes to the 2021 Bobcat and Cougar hunting seasons, including opposing the increase in Bobcat hunting permits and the use of predator management plans for cougars. The DWR seeks to expand the use of predator management plans for cougars, allowing unlimited year-round hunting in 33 units. This means that cougars will be subject to unlimited hunting in the majority of our state. These plans will be harmful to Utah's cougar populations, disrupting their sensitive social structures and killing female cougars who may be raising dependent young. It's also harmful to Utah ranchers, as killing territorial cougars opens up the range to young cats who are more likely to go after easy prey like livestock, as well as wander into human communities. The use of predator management plans is not grounded in sound wildlife management science and will not support healthy, sustainable mule deer and bighorn sheep herds in the long run. Decades of research shows that indiscriminate hunting of cougars will not enhance big game populations. Mule deer and bighorn sheep across the West have experienced population declines over the latter part of the last century because of a myriad of factors such as habitat loss, changes in forage quality, disease, heavy hunting, and drought. The DWR must address these factors if it wants to boost herd numbers. I also have a paragraph that I was going to read on CWD, but I think it's been adequately addressed tonight, so I won't bore you with that. I will be emailing all of you my statement here tonight. Furthermore, the DWR's population goals for big game species like deer will likely no longer be obtainable given the factors I mentioned, especially increased human development into our wild spaces. Meanwhile, hunters are killing more cougars now than ever before as DWR seeks to meet these unrealistic goals. Rather than scapegoating cougars and bobcats, we really should be reevaluating deer and sheep herd goals and setting realistic population targets that prioritize wildlife and environmental health. The DWR's recommendations and predator management plans allow for heavy, unsustainable killing of bobcats and cougars, largely against any substantial evidence or best available science that doing so is beneficial for wildlife or Utahns. No other state allows such widespread heavy hunting of cougars to boost prey populations, largely because the science just does not support this approach when we know other factors like development and weather have a much greater influence on big game populations. In summary, we cannot keep killing our way to better wildlife management. Rather, we need sustainable, effective management that looks at entire ecosystems, including the significant benefits cougars and bobcats can provide. We ask you to reject the DWR's recommendations and oppose their predator management plans. It is truly time for the DWR to update the agency's management strategies by relying on the latest science to better conserve native carnivores and prey species alike. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Were there any more comment cards that didn't make it up here?
Okay, for the RAC, do we need any more discussion, clarification, or additional information from Darren?
Can you give us the numbers off the spot and stock permits from last year? How many were sold and what was the
Yeah, we
success?
sold just over 1,000. I think the last number I saw was 1,027, and we saw somewhere in the neighborhood of 7, I want to say, and it may have been as high as 10 harvested. So it's very low success, which we expected. I think it'd be helpful because given the comments, I think maybe our predator management plan process is not clear to everybody, and so just let me, for the benefit of the board and for the folks here, explain how that process works. We were, first of all, the guiding regulations behind the director's predator management plan policy is state code that passed last year, and so state code requires the division director to take immediate action whenever a mule deer not just mule deer, an ungulate population is failing to meet management goals, and but it also wants us to establish that a predator, and the code includes all predators, not just mountain lions, but bears and the possibility of others, are significantly contributing to that decline. So what the division did in order to, that's the legislation, that's what the director is required to do. And so we evaluate our populations twice a year, usually in July and then again in December. July, we've got the winter behind us. We can look at mule deer and elk populations and see how they made it through the winter. And then again in December, typically right after we do our capture and collaring and body condition scoring, so we can kind of see how, most of the time we're looking at mule deer, but what kind of body condition they are in going into the winter, and try to predict, what the likely survival rate is based on the data we've seen in the past. So we look at it twice a year. If any of those factors indicate that there's 2 reasons why we might enter a predator management plan. I think I've touched on this before. One is where we see cause-specific mortality, where predators are directly contributing to a large percentage of adult mortality or fawn mortality. The second instance for mule deer is when we've seen a large population decline. The literature suggests that if a population is far below the habitat's ability to support the animals, that's when predator management is likely to show some benefit. The closer a population comes to the carrying capacity, this habitat carrying capacity of the area, the less likely predator management is effective. So we take that into account. The division undertook last year, and many of you probably remember, to reassess all of our population unit management goals with that consideration in mind. Typically, we're looking at what's the long-term average and what can we sustain over time, not necessarily what drought might do to a population, but what we think that carrying capacity and population objective ought to be over time. The predator management guidelines are in our policy that came around last year, I believe. So that did go through the public process. I mentioned what the sideboards would be to enter a predator management plan. When the plan is written, it requires us to put specific criteria in each plan as to when we would consider exiting the plan. So that's all required in the document. Those documents maybe aren't as available to the public as they could be. We could certainly have a discussion about that and let people know. The other thing I'd recommend is that people talk to their district biologists about these plans. They know the most about it. We really are pushing this out and down to that level. We're relying heavily on our district biologists to let us know, based on their best professional judgment and their knowledge of the unit, when it needs to be, when you do some predator management and when it might not be warranted. So that's kind of where we are on that. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. I hope that kind of covers some of the concepts behind predator management plans and where we find ourselves today as far as that topic goes. I'd be happy to answer or clarify anything else.
One, I was going to say thank you for doing that, because that's something I had listed down, because I think there's a huge difference between the predator management bill that passed last year and the Cougar plan or the Bobcat plan. They're radically different things. And I actually had something, dang it, I just lost it. Oh, I know we talked about the study that's coming up that's in Central Utah. Do we currently have any collared cats in Northern Utah? I know we lost one a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so USU is in the third year of a 5-year PhD study looking at cougars on the cache, the manti, and the book cliffs, and we do still have collared cats on the air in the northern part of the state. Okay. Yeah.
Do you know how many?
And
if you don't, that's
okay. Think 4 on the cache and similar 3, and similar numbers on I think the manti might have 5 bucks and book cliffs somewhere in that neighborhood too. So that's what's currently on the air. We've collared many more cats, and we've had some collar issues, and some of those cats have been taken by hunters as well. So
okay.
May I say something there?
Yeah.
You failed to mention, or it hasn't been mentioned here, that the sportsmen and the livestock men have actually gone together and contributed their financial benefit or support to collaring the livestock also.
Yeah.
And I believe we've got some 150, some 600 collars out on lambs in northern Utah right now. It's going to further add to our studies and stuff. We're wanting to make this thing work and to get this data that we're looking for to support what you folks have been doing, and we appreciate all the help that's come our way.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. This is an effort led primarily by the Utah Department of Ag, but we've collared, with David, how we do 90, I don't remember, a lot, a lot of lambs. But we're interested in looking at what's happening to these lambs when they're out there on the landscape. How many are we losing to predators, which predators, disease, et cetera. So those are all, it's quite a bit of effort. Those are not GPS collars. They're VHF. So we've got technicians out there each day listening, and if they detect a dead one, they go find it. With the USU, we did actually look at, so when they were out looking at mortalities, they did find domestic sheep in those kill sites, and the producers were gracious enough to let us kind of leave those cats online and see what they were detecting, what their herders were detecting, as opposed to what our researchers are finding from collared. And that wound up being about 3-to-1. So we'll see where this new data leads us. That's just 1 year worth of data. So we'll have to see, but we're excited about seeing where that leads.
No, Mike, I apologize. I remember the other thing I was going to ask. Okay. It came up that down in the central meeting that an opinion was given that some of these recommendations are not something that we have jurisdiction over.
Right.
Whose opinion? Where did that come from? Is it accurate? Is that accurate?
Yeah. So the predator management plans and are a director action. And so they don't come through the RAC, and the reason is the legislation requires immediate action. And so the director will take action both in December and then again in July. And so we're providing that information to the RACs just so that everybody's aware of what's coming and going. We, again, do evaluate those every year. And if we find a unit is not benefiting from our predator management plan, we'll pull it out. But that's the district biologist that's making those calls. So the other thing is the language about public depredation on public land, that's in statute. So that's something that that language would have to be changed by the legislature. So we just don't have the authority to make changes there. It's mirrored in our rule, but code always supersedes rule. So
I think the recommendation to not harvest collared lions would fall within the purview of the RAC.
certainly does. That's a good public discussion to have.
As well as the fifth recommendation of move certain units from harvest objective to split season structure. Would that be
yes
as well? And then the clear criteria for when a unit goes in and out of predator management would be director's authority. Same with the Beaver East.
Right.
As well as what you mentioned with the public lands.
And we can certainly, those documents are available. So if people are interested in a particular unit and why it's in predator management, those documents are generated so people can see those.
Anything else for Darren? Okay. I'd like to remind the RAC that before I'm ready to accept a motion, but I'd like you to think it through clearly so that we can keep it a fluid process. I'll give you the time to kind of think that through as we get the motion and second and vote. So at this time, I'd entertain the motion.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
Is there any reason to address the central issue? The collars, cats in the central region?
Ban on that.
Yeah, it's certainly within your purview to do so. It was addressed last night. I know it's not in our region, but just as a matter of discussion and principle, it's something you guys could certainly consider.
Yeah, a little more discussion. Yeah, it's interesting to me that vote was 11-1. I don't get why we didn't have more representation from the agricultural end there. But when they came to us 3 years ago to talk about putting, and they were gracious enough to consult the livestock people about these collared lions, the USU study. Part of the parameters of that was that the collared lions could be taken. And they didn't qualify whether it was by livestock men or by houndsmen or by whom or by when. And during depredations, they could be taken also. I don't know quite what happened in the central region, why there was not more opposition to it. But I can tell you, if we start talking about that in our region, there's going to be plenty of opposition to it, just because of the promises that was made to us for us to cooperate and help this project along. Now, I don't know what's gone on down there, but obviously it's interesting to me that there was just 11-1 thing there. Our point of view, and you understand, I'm sure, when a cat's killing our livestock, we don't care if it's got a collar on or not. We have to take it. We have to take it. We should be looking at that in the same way if it's killing fawns or killing whatever other wildlife out there that we may want to protect. These cats are not eating grass. And just one more point, during this drought, when our grass eaters are dying because of the drought, the cats are not. They're eating more plant eaters. They're increasing, just like was mentioned, and the other populations are decreasing. That's my point of view, at least. Thank you for the time.
If I'm remembering correctly, this proposal would exempt spot and stock hunters and depredation hunters from the no-kill collar thing. So you would still have that option to do. If you have a depredating cat,
But you can see the spot and stalk is very ineffective. I mean, they killed very few. We need all the help we can get to kill these animals.
Yeah, but if
as much as we want to know about it, we'd like to kill them.
Yeah, but if they did have a collared depredating cat, it would not be protected by this rule. You'd be able to take it.
Trouble would be identifying if he's is or isn't. That we don't know.
Well, we went round and round a year ago on this, so might as well start. So we had this exact discussion last year. And I'll just put out the proposal. So this could get not ugly, but complicated enough. I'm just going to go with exceptions for now. Are you okay with that, Mike?
Yes, we'll take it that way.
Okay, so I would propose that we recommend not allowing the taking of a collared cat by houndsmen, other than for deprivation or spot and stalk.
Is that only in those 6 units?
No.
For all?
For all.
Statewide.
And we can comment on it after. Oh, well, can I comment on my recommendation, or do I need to stop here? I don't know.
I think we have to keep to the.
Okay, I'll stop here.
To the motion. Right?
Okay.
Was that a motion or a recommendation?
That was my motion.
That was his motion. So let me just, and correct me, Randy, as I go through this, not allow take of collared lions other than depredation or spot stock.
Correct.
Okay.
I'll second that.
So, Randy. Right. So we have a motion and a second to not allow the take of a collared lion other than in the cases of depredation or spot and stock.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, Casey.
And this would be for the division. I know we do collars on, well, pretty much everything else. Do we require these types of exemptions on any other wildlife species?
No, and our strategy so far has been to discourage it in our guidebooks, but not to make it illegal. But I'm not aware of any prohibitions for big game, for example, or others. I think there's an option, but we don't exercise it.
So I guess my question would be then, if it'd be sort of twofold, is one, are the studies where we do allow taking of other wildlife, do you consider those scientifically robust enough to make management decisions?
Yeah, and sometimes it depends on the objective of the study too. If we're looking at cause-specific mortality, we'd be interested in knowing if collared animals were what rate they were being taken. People's behavior would enter into it, of course. Some people wouldn't want to take a collared animal, and some people might. So a little bit of noise, but we're not, at least on the study that we're talking about in central Utah, we're not looking at that question. So that wouldn't necessarily be a complicating factor, but writ large, we definitely want to look at it. Depends on what the study's objectives are.
Okay.
Does that help, Casey? I hope I answered your question.
No, it doesn't. Mr. Chair, may I make a comment, or would you like me to?
What do you say? Yes, Casey, go ahead.
May I? So I have concerns similar to those concerns that Junior has expressed, but I guess hearing that we don't do this for anything else, I think we may be, we're making exemptions for one species when we don't do it for anything else. And I think that may cause some long-term ramifications within all data sets. So I'm opposed to this motion for those scientific reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
I want to ask a follow-up then to Casey's question for Darren. In some ways you're comparing apples and oranges there, and it's a little bit difficult because we're talking about different sample sizes, not just by studies, but also comparing the number of deer collared to the number of lions collared. Will you speak to that, Darren, just for the RAC?
Yeah, clearly, a study that has 100 collared animals as opposed to one that has 5, you may have more concern and in eliminating one of 5 rather than one of 100. Maybe it'd be helpful too to just kind of cover kind of what the track record is on this. We have had colored lines under the current study taken, but it hasn't been an overwhelming number, and it's certainly something that it hasn't hurt the integrity of the data that we're looking at. The flip side is that, you know, these lions that these guys have caught have been on dry ground this spring. It's been amazing they've even been able to do it, frankly, and if they get taken, it's frustrating. But so far, recommending in the guidebook that people not take collared animals has worked, in that take hasn't been high. But obviously this is a good topic for the public process. So
How many lions in those, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 units, have collars on them?
6 so far. The goal would be 30. And obviously if well, maybe not obviously, but of course, if a lion was taken and a collared lion was taken, we'd make an effort to redeploy that collar on a different animal. So we try to keep the sample size high, but that'd be sort of the strategy. But 30 is the objective.
And do you have the slide on your computer? Sorry, Darren.
No, it's fine. I should know better.
Let me put my camera on to help you.
You're good.
Do you have that slide on your computer with the number of lions harvested in those units last year? Or the past
I don't think I have. Well, yeah, I do. Let's see. I don't have a slide, but I think I have that data here. Let me just look at our harvest.
And if we're veering too far away from the motion, somebody reel me in.
Well, it's part of what people want to know.
I believe so too. It's good discussion for the public and the RAC.
Let's see.
I've got the motion written down, so.
Remind me what you're looking for. Harvest last year?
Or the past couple of years, but whatever you have, I guess, for the.
It'll be a little bit clunky, but let's see. Let me present. Try not to break anything here, Mike. So that's, I don't know how readable that is for everyone. That's going to be some small text, and yeah, get your readers on, I guess. I wonder if I've got something even that's a little bit more easy to interpret. Maybe ask me what you're looking at, and maybe I can tease something out. But
So I'm asking specifically for those 5 units that currently have six lions collared so far, and I'm wondering how many lions were harvested last year in those units.
So if we're looking at this at the Wasatch portion, is this really hard to see? I can try to make it bigger. Okay. Looks like, let's see how fast I can do math. Yeah. So 16, 27 on the Wasatch portion. None in the Salt Lake unit, but 8 on Cascade, 8 on Timpanogos, 11. So, you know, it's a pretty big area. And then the Nebo looks like 10 total on the Nebo. Are you doing any on like the Manti? We weren't planning on doing Manti. I think the Ochre Mountains portion of the Ochre Stansbury, which would be Ochre Stansbury West, they took 4 on the east. But you're doing east, okay, where the sheep are. So, oh yeah, you're right. I grew up on the East Coast. I talk about where the road goes, not northwest, south. So that's my excuse. So yes, so on the east it was 8. I don't know if that helps. Hopefully it did.
Sorry. Yeah, it does a little bit. I don't think I have a follow-up to that. Thanks, Darren.
Okay, sure.
I think this is a fantastic motion that's been put forward, and the idea that it's coming from houndsmen, guys who are invested in hunting and chasing cougars. They breed their dogs, they feed their dogs year round to this end, and that they're coming and asking, we will voluntarily impose this handicap, if you will, on ourselves for the good of this population that they target. I think that speaks volume to them of their desire to preserve the population. I think this is a great motion and a great idea.
Let me address that just a little bit. We've changed the motion from what the houndsmen are asking. You've included all units. The houndsmen are only asking for those units down there.
And so we're taking it and building on it. You're right. Yeah.
I wouldn't say he's building on it. I'd say he's tearing it down a bit, from my perspective, respectfully. If the livestock people and agriculture and the end down there are willing to support that and further those studies down there, great. I think that's great. I think you can get the information and the data that's required from those areas down there. It possibly doesn't have the animals that we do here. But from our perspective, we cannot. We was guaranteed that this would not happen when we had supported the collaring in the first place. Now, if those folks have spoken, and if we want to support that, I think that's fine. But as far as supporting it from this end of it, I'm very much opposed to changing the motion from what the houndsmen have originally, and I believe I asked you, sir, did I not, if it was just those areas that you're requesting that. Thank you.
No, I very specifically included, and I wasn't playing a game. That's why
Yes,
I asked.
I
that,
understand.
So
I
that I
understand.
wasn't trying to sneak anything
No,
by.
no,
But my point in doing this is the only way we can know what's happening is to track the animals. If we're not tracking the animals, we're never going to know what's happening. With the depredation, I will bet my next paycheck that those animals are just getting pushed out of those areas. As soon as we take them off depredation and management, those animals are going to come back in. But we don't know that because we're not tracking them. So I see this as a great scientific opportunity to actually know what's happening. And we're giving the livestock men an opportunity to take an animal. If it's depredating, they can take it. So that's my logic behind it.
Randy,
I think it's a good discussion. I don't want to, this might help with the discussion. Otherwise I just keep quiet, but the USU study in the collared cats on the northern part of the state is essentially finished. And so as we move forward, there will be some collared animals, but we're not going to be actively studying those animals. So maybe that will elucidate some things. I just want to make sure that RAC was aware.
Thanks, Darren.
So just a question on this. Is the motion to make an amendment to the Cougar management plan to say any study going forward, we're going to prohibit the harvest of the collared land?
Doesn't say
Specific
study.
only to this
Sorry.
study?
It says that the way the motion's written, does not allow the take of collared cougars, other than depredation and spawn stock is how it's worded.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be a change to the plan. It'd be a statewide regulation.
I got a comment on this as a producer. I've been in this situation before. You're sitting in the middle of this, middle of the summer, and you've got a depredating lion. And to take a depredating lion during this heat is very difficult. I don't care who you are, professional hunter, houndsman. So we come back in the fall on first snow and take the cat that's in that area. Hopefully that's the depredating animal. If it's a collared cat, it isn't taken. And then I'm at loss. Because the houndsmen aren't going to come in and they've been asked not to take a collared lion.
But that's not the motion. The motion is it gives the exception if it's a depredating.
Do you know in January if that's the same lion that was there in July? That's what we don't know.
I want to bring the rack back to something that Darren said of outside of this particular study that we've been talking about and the houndsmen have been talking about, having data on an animal that was killed with a collar on is useful. And I think maybe an issue with the way the motion that it's currently worded, and I know we have to vote on it, is that it is really restrictive for moving forward. And Randy, I hear you that information is really interesting, but on the flip side of it, having data on animals that are being hunted, the division also needs that.
Thank you, Emily. So I think we've had plenty of discussion regarding this motion, but I think we need to move forward with the one that's on the floor, correct? Okay. At this time, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of Randy's motion, and I'll read it again, not to allow the take of mountain lions with collar other than in the cases of depredation or spot and stock. All in favor, say aye. Raise your right hand. 2, 3. All opposed? And Casey was opposed, and Emily is opposed.
I'm a no, yes.
Yep, I had you down, Case. So 3-6. Now you go. Okay, so it fails 3-6. 3-4, 6 opposed. I'll now entertain a modified version of a motion, of that motion, or any other motion.
I'll make that modified motion that we do support those areas that were mentioned by the houndsman. It's been supported, obviously, by the agriculture department or representatives down there, that we support that, that decision in their areas alone.
And I'll second that.
Okay, Junior, I'm going to read it back to you. You do support the areas requested in the central region and on the original.
Yes, that's my understanding where it was approved last night. Is that correct?
Yeah, to not allow the take of collared lions in the 6 study units of the central region. With the exception of for reasons of depredation and during spot and stock.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So we have the new motion on the floor. We have a motion by Junior and second by Ryan. Oh, Earl, David Earl. Not allow the take in the 6 units and support the areas requested in the central region. Reread it.
To not allow the take of lions in the 6 units in the central region with the exception of depredation and spot and stock.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, collared lions, sorry.
I have
Thanks.
color written down. Okay, so we've got the motion and the second, and now I entertain the vote. All in favor of this motion, raise your right hand, say aye. 2, 3. And Emily, what about Casey?
No.
He's a no. So 8-1. So it passes in favor 8-1 of not allowing the take in the 6 units and supporting the areas requested in the central region, other than in the cases of spot and stock and depredation. Okay. Okay, so I was kind of winging it there at the end.
Since it passed, you have to ask
Yeah.
Casey what he said.
That's right. Casey, can you tell us why you were opposed?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to be consistent with the concerns I raised under the previous motion, which is that we don't do this for any other wildlife species.
Thank you, Casey. I appreciate it. Okay, that passes. At this time, I want to make mention for public record that Kevin McLeod was trying to get on the call and was not present for the RAC meeting. He had trouble getting on, and I was asked to make mention of that. All the balance. So now I'll entertain a motion on the balance of the plan. or of the agenda item?
I'll make a motion to accept the balance of the proposal.
Junior. Okay, so the motion is to accept the remainder of the plan as presented. It was made by Brad and seconded by Junior. All in favor, say aye.
Yes.
9. Casey's yes, so 9-0. Unanimous. It's unanimous 9-0. Okay. Okay, I want to jump the gun. This time I'll entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for your participation and attending Northern Region RAC this evening.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Brian's made a motion. All in favor?
Second. Do you have a second on that?
A second from Matt Clark. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.